Welcome everyone to the first Teaching at the Right Level webinar. My name is Kim Titchman and I'm a Policy Associate at TaRL Africa, and I'll be moderating the session today. So many of you will be very familiar with the format already, but for any of you who are joining for the first time, welcome. This is the first webinar in a series of webinars about teaching at the right level, which dive into key components of Pratham's TaRL approach. And today's webinar will focus on adapting the teaching at the right level approach to different contexts. So we're very fortunate to have Usha Rain. She's the Director of Content and Training at Pratham. Emily Kupito, who is the Associate Director of Policy at TaRL Africa. And we have from Young Love, Mwitsepi Matseng, who's the co-founder and country coordinator at Young Love, as well as Noam Angrist, who's the co-founder and executive director also from Young Love. So thanks all for joining us. And so the presentation today will last about 40 minutes. And after the presentations, we'll have some time for questions. So thanks to everyone who submitted your questions through the Google form ahead of time. So we've chosen a few of those, and we'll address those questions during the Q&A session. If you have any questions that come up during the presentation, please just put them in the chat box at the bottom. And then if we have enough time, we'll address a few of those during the Q&A as well. So just before we begin, I also wanted to highlight a new resource that's available. As some of you may know, Pratham and TaRL have worked together to create a resource for teaching at the right level implementers and innovators, and you can find that at teachingattheright.level.org. And in addition to those resources, there's also a blog and a forum for you to share your own news about TaRL from around the world. Cool. So with that, we will dive in. Emily, if you're on the line, would you like to begin?
Sure, happy to.
Perfect.
Usha, I do hope I can see you, so I hope that you're able to figure out the audio so we can hear you as well. Great. Thank you all for joining. I checked out our participants and see many familiar names, so thank you for spending your time on this webinar, and hopefully we'll share some useful ideas, and it would be great to have some nice discussions after this. As Kim mentioned, I'm Emily Kupito. I work as the Associate Director of Policy for TaRL Africa, and I've been working on teaching at the right level in partnership with the ministry and many other partners in Zambia for about 3 years now. And the approach in Zambia was in about 500 schools this past year, and is about to roll out to 1,000 schools starting in January. So I wanted to share some of our experience of starting with the evidence, mostly from India, but also from across the world, and then thinking about how that evidence could apply. Rob, you have my slides. Are you able to flip to the first slide? Great. Okay, so to take a step back, I wanted to start by thinking a little bit about how we might think through how evidence could apply generally to policy. And I think that there are millions of dollars spent on research every year, but still we don't have enough research to answer every pressing policy question in every setting at exactly the right moment that a policymaker needs that answer in order to make an informed decision. And so we have a number of options to address that gap between research and policy. And one option is just to say, we really can't say anything until we're very, very certain that this research applies to this setting and has been conducted in that local setting. And we can say with 100% certainty that this is going to have this amount of impact if it's scaled up. The problem is that you never have research that's able to answer that, because tomorrow is always a new context. And because as things grow to scale, you don't know how they're going to go in the new locations as things scale. And as things get to 100% scale, it's also hard to conduct a randomized evaluation to figure out the impact of this intervention. And so what I'd like to share today is thinking about how we think about these questions at TaRL and putting forth a structured approach for thinking about that, rather than necessarily answering all of these questions with 100% certainty. So on the next slide, I share a little bit about the thinking about how we might think about a structured approach and think about how to combine lessons from evidence with other information about the world, about what works and what doesn't work. And I think that, first of all, to say is that at JPAL, we don't think about a single study and think about, oh, does this mean that this should be scaled or not scaled? But rather, we're thinking about the quality of that study, what it is we thought about the world before that study happened. We think a lot about bodies of research and what it is that we've learned from bodies of evidence. And we think a lot about mechanisms and what it is that made this intervention in this particular setting have an impact, and why did that happen, and how could that mechanism apply to other settings. So there's a lot of thinking about theory. There's a lot of thinking about descriptive evidence about a local setting and what are the issues that that setting's addressing, and also thinking about what it is that policymakers have as their priorities of what they're trying to address. So on the next slide, I share a little bit about a pull from an article written by Marianne Bates and Rachel Glenister that lays out this generalizability framework. And so they set forth 4 questions which I think are useful to anyone trying to think through, can research apply to a new setting, and what is it that you might want to look at to understand about whether that research applies, and what you would need to do to do some scoping, to think about that and to test that over time. So the first question is, what is the disaggregated theory behind the program or the intervention, and why is it that that intervention worked? Second, how strong is the evidence that's required for the general behavior change? So a lot of the randomized evaluations are looking at changing people's behavior, and what is the evidence that that will work, and what is that evidence that that will work robustly across different settings and in different conditions? 3, what are the local conditions that need to hold in order for that theory to apply? And 4, what is the evidence that the implementation can be carried out well, and honestly will be carried out well over time as the program grows to scale? So on the next slide is an introduction about our example here, which is the teaching at the right level approach in Zambia. It's locally known as the catch-up program. And so I'll walk through these 4 steps. I think that I've written this up to be quite a clean process where all the puzzle pieces fit together 100%. And I honestly think it's a much grayer process where we have strengths of each of these 4 pieces, and they give us a useful framework for working through, but there is some continued iteration on all of these fronts as we go along. So first, the disaggregated theory behind the program. I think one of the big parts of the theory behind teaching at the right level is that the education systems in a lot of these places often misses the mark. So it often caters to top performers rather than helping all children learn well. And I think this is especially the case in which children are missing basic skills. That means that if you aren't able to read a word, or you're not able to understand place value, it's very difficult to engage with the existing education curriculum, and that creates a setting in which children fall farther and farther behind. And so this theory, I once heard a PRASA member say, you know, education systems across the world tend to be very similar to each other. And I said, oh my gosh, no, there's no way education systems are similar to each other. But I think the point is, in every system, there's often children that fall behind, and there's very little that those systems are doing to help those children. And that is something that we see across the board, is something that holds true, unfortunately, about many of these systems. On the next slide, I'll talk more about the strength of the evidence, and there's 2 different pieces that I break this into. One is the body of evidence about education interventions in general. And I think one of the very strong lessons that are coming out of the randomized evaluations as a whole, rather than as any individual study, is that continuing to throw inputs at the education systems without changing anything about the structure of the education systems doesn't have much effect on learning outcomes. I'm not going to run through the details here. I think these have been presented in other webinars, but just to say that there are a lot of studies that say business as usual inputs are insufficient for increasing learning outcomes. On the next slide, the second piece of the strength of the evidence is evidence around teaching at the right level. And again, I won't run through all the details, but I wanted to share some of the studies with the group to say there have been has been a very long and iterative process thinking about teaching at the right level, thinking about what's effective about it, and building on top of randomized evaluations to more deeply understand the implementation criteria under which it works and the different settings and the different modes of delivery under which teaching at the right level works. And so when we think about the strength of the evidence, we're building both on top of this body of evidence about what works and what doesn't work in education, in addition to a very careful process thinking about this particular intervention and testing it out over time. Moving along. The third piece of this is looking at local conditions. And so as I mentioned, one of the premises of what teaching at the right level fixes is in a space where kids are missing basic skills, it can help children get those basic skills such that they can accelerate. So one of the first things that the team at JPAL and Pratham does when we think about teaching at the right level and how it might apply to new contexts is we look at learning outcomes in those local settings. And there's many groups that have been working very hard to make sure there's good data on those learning outcomes, but there's still places in which we don't know much about the basic levels, about the basic skill levels in those countries, and just doing a first pass at understanding what are the challenges for students in those settings and how well have they mastered these basic skills is really step one to understanding, are the local conditions right for teaching at the right level to be helpful. So as you'll see in this graph, and I apologize, the key isn't perfect, but the last three columns on the right are all different districts of Zambia. So the third most one to the right is Monze district, then Pemba district, and then finally Chipata district in Zambia, and those are all pilot districts in Zambia, and some of the data that was collected at the baseline around teaching at the right level. You'll see that Monze and Pemba really have quite low learning outcomes, and Chipata has a bit higher learning outcomes. But in all of these districts, there's a huge gap in basic skills, and many students who are still missing the very fundamentals of education. There would be other things that we might want to look at for local conditions too. This is not an exhaustive list. There would be things like, are there heterogeneous learning outcomes in the classroom? What are the other programs that are running in these different settings? What has the ministry tried to do around basic skills? Are there any other remedial approaches? What else is happening in the middle primary grades that we would look at as we're doing scoping, thinking about teaching at the right level? On the next slide is our final point around evidence of the implementation process. The way in which we thought about this in Zambia was to say, we know that teaching at the right level can work across many different implementation processes, but we also know that if the implementation isn't strong, that the program breaks down. So for example, if teachers are not mentored well, often they revert to their old methods of teaching these students, and they just stop doing teaching at the right level. And so when we thought about this as JPAL, we said, it'd be great to have more RCTs that prove that this works, and it would be great to invest in all those RCTs over time, but we're pretty sure that TaRL works across settings so long as TaRL continues to run, and as long as it gets the support that it needs in the system in order to run. And so maybe what we can do is to monitor how well the logistics work such that we're pretty certain that teaching at the right level is running in the schools in such a way that's helping kids. So we thought about, along the theory of change for inputs and outputs and outcomes, of what things might break down, and then we monitored all of those pieces, and most of that we built into the government monitoring systems with the partners. And the ministry built a lot of this monitoring into their own system. In addition to the ministry's own monitoring system, IPA partnered with us to run an independent process monitoring of the pilot to be sure that the logistics were working on the ground in such a way that would allow TaRL to have an impact. We did not run an RCT and cannot say with any certainty that this led to an impact for students, but we can say that from the pilot, the ministry found and the IPA team found that the intervention was run quite well, and that all of the steps along the theory of change worked rather well, with some variation that the ministry is working on to improve over time. Turning to the next slide, The other thing I wanted to mention about the implementation process is that it's not a static process, that this has been a journey that we've taken with the ministry to help them think about how teaching at the right level might apply in their context. And it's a journey that will continue over time. And I think that as a team, we've also become slightly more sophisticated in our thinking about this, and the ministry has been thinking a lot about that continued process. And so at the beginning, it was starting before we even, before the ministry began to run a project in helping them map out the pros and cons based on evidence, to think about what might apply, might not work in Zambia. It was the government running 3 different models to make sure that there wasn't one model that worked a whole lot better than other models in the local setting. And then when all 3 models worked decently well in terms of the logistics working, I should say, they decided to scale up the model that was most sustainable for their system, rather than necessarily choosing something that's only based on learning outcome data. And then third, thinking about continued systems of review and addressing issues as things have moved along. And I think one of the core pieces of teaching at the right level is these review meetings at all levels. And it's adding data into those meetings, but it's also helping people think as leaders about how they can change, how they can improve. I'm in Zambia at the moment, and there's a lot of talk about, well, this part's working, this part's not working, and how do we change, and how do we review and think and grow this approach so that it becomes stronger over time. And by building those review systems in as a core part of the approach, it helps the ministry make sure that implementation only grows stronger as this grows to bigger and bigger scale in the country. So then on the final slide, I just wanted to share, in addition to this, a little bit from our team's perspective. So rather than from the ministry side, I think we also don't think of implementation as something that's static, that can never be changed, and not something that we just can say, well, we have a study from one setting, do you want to scale it up? And if so, here's your manual of what you do. But rather, with teaching at the right level, it's really a process of sharing fairly complex information with ministry officials in an iterative way, so that they are really in charge of making their own decisions about scaling in the country, but also so that they're super informed as they make those decisions. And we continue to work together to be able to help build the capacity of ministry officials to make sure this implementation is really strong. So here's some of the examples of some of the things that our team has done to support the ministry in Zambia. So things like creating public goods, such as the website that Kim mentioned at the beginning that I encourage all of you to go check out on Teaching at the Right Level, learning journeys to India to see the approach in practice, fundraising to help cover some of the startup cost of getting this into the system and doing some of the initial trainings, which can be relatively expensive in comparison to the running cost of continuing to run TaRL over time. Putting staff into the country and embedding them into the ministry. I have a sample of the JPAL and IPA staff here. We have a joint team in Zambia, but there's also a lot of staff from our partner organizations such as VVOB or UNICEF that are working quite closely with the government in the country to help them build their capacity and be able to do this, including things like helping with the M&E strategy and collecting data and getting ready for those review meetings. And then finally, have really created a partnership in the country that's not just JPAL interacting with the ministry, but many partners interacting with the ministry. And I apologize, it's a bit of an old slide, so we have some partners from other countries as well. But I know in a lot of these settings, all of us are working with a complex web of partners who are all part of the TaRL movement, rather than thinking of this as a PRASM project or a JPAL project or any one individual organization. And I think that as we develop these partnerships and deepen this, it will help ministries across the world deepen their ability to do this well and to continue to think about how to improve children's learning outcomes. On the very last slide, I just wanted to say thank you and to share a few resources for further reading if you're interested in learning more about JPAL's thinking about generalizability, and always happy to have individual conversations about that as well. Thanks so much.
Great, thank you, Emily. Up next we have Usha.
I think you have, yeah, this is just wanted to talk to you about teaching at the right level. How the international interest started through the program that we conducted in India as combined activities for maximized learning. The name of the program, initially we used to call TRL as Kamal. Kamal means wonder. And we started the program with an objective to make every child learn, because the issue is related to children's children's learning. Children go to school, but most of them do not learn, and that was the concern expressed everywhere. And initially, we started with lots of other projects, and we were wondering how do they learn. We were going to different through different programs, and we were looking at other NGOs programs also, and we were looking at how teachers teach to the children. But then subsequently we had to come up with our own model, and that model was we thought it has to be something which can be understood by everybody. And it wasn't about just merely talking about and saying that quality of education is not good. But what we understood, that kids go to school but they are not able to read, they are not able to do and solve simple arithmetic sums. So instead of saying that children are not learning and the quality is not good, we very specifically said that they are not reading and they are not doing mathematics. So it was about talking something with a very focused manner, and which will be understood by everybody, and it is not just theorists and educationists and people who work in education field, but it was about telling to common people, especially those who are um, um, parents, who are those poor parents who work in fields, who are landless laborers, and who aspire and feel that if their children go to school, they are learning. They feel that if they are attending schools, we could not go to school because we were unfortunate. We could not get proper education. But if my child is going to school, I'm sure my child will learn. But unfortunately, the thing was they were not understanding that their children were going to school, but they were not learning, and they were not able to actually say it in clear terms that what exactly are they not learning. So probably this was the thing that we gave voice to common people by saying that children are not reading and they are not doing mathematics. Now, so we feel that the problem is universal, okay, everywhere. Governments after governments are hell bent on creating schools, making buildings, spending money on infrastructure, textbooks, appointing teachers, but nobody thinks about what is the outcome. So this was we started, and then way back in Ghana, with IPA, the TICAI program was undertaken, and they explored something. And we had had some experience with PAL network. So international work started, and we were like, I myself was not very sure that we had experience working in India, and we had experience working in India across many states, with grassroots level people, grassroots level volunteers, but we had no experience in working with international agencies in international grounds. But uh, TRL address the challenges in India, and we realize that, yeah, if we say it is, it can be done in India, and India is a diverse country, so it can be done in anywhere across the country, because the solution is simple, it is doable, it can be replicated, and it is cost effective. So all these factors were very important for us to understand. Why is it doable? Because it's not very complicated. We do not speak the theoretical language. We do not use terminology which will not be understood by people. And we definitely know that the method is so very simple that it can be replicated anywhere across the globe. And thirdly, normally everywhere the worry is about money. So we wanted to keep this cost effective, not to spend lots and lots of money. You know, you can create excellent and beautiful, simple, small model, but always there is an issue about replicating it because normally everybody feels that, oh, it is so cost heavy. How can it be replicated? So I'll go to the next slide. Um, what exactly we kept in mind while adopting TRL? So the thing is, when working in the international ground, in India, what we knew that children are at different levels. They are at a beginner level in in language. They are in later level. So we classified levels while testing children, and we just did not say that, oh, in reading these kids are reading and these kids are not reading. But if they are not reading, what exactly are they reading and what exactly they are not reading, that we try to define in very clear terms. So here in India, we find that children are either evenly distributed among different levels, or there are very around 30 to 40% children who are non-readers. Whereas in international field, what we saw that almost 90% children are non-readers. The reason in international level, what we realize that in almost just like India, all across sub-Saharan Africa and in Latin America, the European countries ruled. So it is Britain, it is French, it is Portuguese, it is Spanish. So the languages there are these languages, and schools are run in these languages. The medium of schooling is these foreign languages. Incidentally, again, in India, though British ruled us, we have our own indigenous scripts and we have our own languages. So we have our own schools, which through which we learn in our schools. Like I myself have studied in my medium school, that is, which is called Marathi, and I have never studied in English medium school. I studied English in English medium only in my university education for 4 years. So in other countries, we realize that the problem is really grave, and there are large number of children who are in schools but they are not learning the language, which is called state language, and the state language is actually a foreign language. So that is the problem. So in couple of countries like francophone countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Madagascar, and even in Peru, children have to learn in foreign language. Incidentally, I can give an example of Cote d'Ivoire. I was recently over there. That even in rural areas, children can understand French, though they are not able to speak, but they can understand French. And French, Portuguese, and Spanish languages are somewhat phonic, not like English. So we have not tried anything in English so far. Something we are trying to do, but not really the way we feel like doing. But for French, Spanish, and Portuguese, we have created a kind of syllable chart based on our Indian experience, where we use syllable chart in Indian languages, and we realize that this is working. And why this is working? Because we are helping children to code and decode, and there are some methods that we use while helping children to um, decode the words or learn reading. Along with reading, similarly, we try to do something in mathematics. So, in mathematics, the stages that we have followed, we for both languages, language and mathematics, we made sure that it is not a linear process. Learning is a non-linear process. So if we are introducing children numbers, so along with numbers, we try to introduce operations also. And while doing operations, it is not just restricted to only activity. It is much beyond that. And what is that beyond? Is basically helping children to learn and not really help him to not really teach him. So, how to make children go from one level to another is very important for us, and that is how we try to work on the project. Teaching learning material is another very important factor, though the cost is not very high. We make sure that the very simple teaching learning material is given to the children and tracking children's levels to move to another level as they progress. We'll go to the next slide. Yeah. So the focus is on asking the facilitator or a teacher not to follow the traditional method and then help children to learn and not really to teach him. So, and understand and have faith in their ability that they can learn, and each thing and everything you don't have to teach to them. So, we face this problem on international grounds and even in India that teachers are taught with very traditional methodologies, and their teachers' colleges also believe in lecture method. Whereas here we help children to participate as they learn and just give them some support. And how do they do that? How do we ask them to do it? Just put your hand behind the back, respect them, and allow them to express. So it is about to all these things aesthetically or by visually. What we this needed very specifically. So every person who's directly associated with the program has to be very carefully looking at the data and not just for reporting, but the person should be looking at it child, and after the intervention where the child has gone, and the mentor is there to help the child. So mentoring is very essential. That is what we feel, and across different countries, I think very convincingly we are trying to tell the governments that yes, we can undertake the program in different parts of the country, in different countries, but governments are now making sure that mentoring support is provided by the government, and that helps a lot because normally what happens if wherever in many countries we are moving in, and we see that in Nigeria the project is going on in Borno region, and they are spread across different parts. I saw in Cote d'Ivoire, the whole region of Gabiaji, which is Kakawa region, cocoa growing region, which is far away, which is very, very remote. People do not normally visit those schools, but because of the mentoring, teachers feel very encouraged and they are working hard, and we see good results over there. So I'll just go to the next slide. Yeah. So this program actually is being undertaken by us, and we are very confident that definitely we can make some change. Only I will need some help for English learning because in English countries, English colonial countries, Anglophone countries, we are working with the local languages and not really teaching them English. For example, in Zambia, we are working for Sinanja and Chitango. In Nigeria, we are working for the language Hausa and not English. So this is the only problem I am facing personally as the academic person. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Usha. Right, so finally we have Mitsefi and Noam from Young South.
Great. Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be a part of this webinar. So let me just give a background, and then Noah will chime in more on how we thought about adaptation. So yeah, we thought about teaching at the right level for the past 2 years now, working really closely with Pratham, with JPAL, to understand which, the models that they've implemented and just the general work that has been conducted for these years. We've done learning visits in Zambia, which was really helpful for our team to actually see how TaRL is in action. So since then, we've made great strides with teaching at the right level. We've worked with over 14 schools right now in Gaborone and also in other nearby regions to implement teaching at the right level. And the model that we are taking, or we're excited to see come alive even more. We have two models. First is the direct delivery model. This is, training youthful facilitators to deliver the intervention. And then we also have another second model. This is the using a government agent. So where we currently are now is to explore both the models and actually implementing using the two models, which we can further explain as we go on. But we're really excited to see the energy that, teaching at the right level has brought. Excited to share that, we've received we've signed a 4-year memorandum of understanding with the Ministry of Basic Education. And part of this work, provides providing resources such as, facilitators, training space and venues, just so that they could be able to support the TaRL project as we move to scale. Our model of operation, we've only just, like I mentioned, worked in 14 schools to date. And with next year, with our innovation hub, or should I say the direct delivery model, we hope to really ramp this up to working with over 50 schools, whilst also, we worked to ensure the TaRL government agent model is up and running. So just to share, some updates and factors in mind that when we thought about adaptation of teaching at that level, some of the things that we think more about is how do we, keep the core pillars of teaching at the right level core to our implementation. So this is, assessing students according to their different learning abilities, but also ensuring that they are actually learning whilst in the classroom. So really, that's also one of the considerations that we're thinking more about when you think about adaptation. And also this government piece. We didn't want to necessarily wait for us to move, but we wanted to move alongside with government because we believe that teaching at the right level should exist within these government structures. So how this looks like, we're getting a lot of energy from, I would say this where we actually direct delivery, where we're actually implementing using our youth facilitators. We're getting a lot of energy just from that implementation, where we can get our government stakeholders to come and actually see what's happening in the schools. That is getting them more excited. They get to understand what TaRL is in terms of the program. So, we've worked closely with the government, the curriculum department, to look at our materials and tools for adaptation, to actually say what are students actually being taught in the classroom, how are they being assessed, so that when we actually, design our materials, it is certainly something that government is on side and actually owns. And then the other big considerations, like Usha had mentioned, is the language, right? The medium of instruction in Botswana is English. But how we have tailored and adapted our tools, we ensure that the classroom session is delivered both in English and Setswana, which is our, I would say, national language. So those are some of the considerations that we have thought about when we think more on adapting teach at the right level, but more so to speak really, we see this as a collaboration with government. We want to be able to design something that can fit in to the schedule. So far right now, we're implementing a 30-day model, 1 hour after the classroom. And we found that this has gotten a lot of support, especially from the schools that we want to implement in with government, because teachers are open. It's not necessarily taking them away from their day-to-day work, but essentially, something that they can see doing just right after the classroom. So that's a model that we are, currently exploring for TaRL. So yeah, that's teaching high level. I will hand it over to Noam. But just to share, we have gotten, a lot of some early results, all looking up. We're excited to really, come the next year and the following year to see both, I would say, our delivery option models running in parallel in the regions that we're going to be working in.
Hello.
Yeah. Hey,
okay. I actually am not sure if there's a response on the webinar, but it seems like it's working. Thanks, Tepi. So yeah, I guess I would just add a few things that I think we've learned through the adaptation process. And I would also just mention that this has been a multi-year process. Our advisory board is chaired by the former permanent secretary of the Ministry of Education. And the way that we actually came to teaching at the right level is about 2 years ago. She said at our annual meeting, is there an evidence-based program out there that is improving learning that might work in our context? So that was actually what prompted us to look for programs out there. We are committed to scaling up evidence-based interventions, and we've worked in Botswana with over 50,000 young people. And teaching at the right level came up really front and center as something that had a lot of evidence. Emily shared about that, and was also really a good fit for the context. And I think a lot of the things that Usa shared really speak to that as well. But before we started, we actually did do a needs assessment just to verify some of those conditions. And that's when the ministry got really excited. And since then, we've actually been in sort of a multi-staged adaptation process, starting quite small and focused. And the reason for this was that the ministry actually said to us, if we as the headquarter ministry mandate this top down to all the schools, we think there might be some resistance. So actually the approach that we would like to take is, please, Young Love, go and directly deliver this in a few regions, get people really excited about it, show that it's working, galvanize kind of grassroots energy and demand, and then the regions will demand this from headquarters, and then we'll scale this up nationally. So that was actually on the guidance of the ministry, and so far we've seen that work extremely well. So I'll just share one really exciting result and then kind of talk about a few of the adaptations that we've seen take place over the past few years. In our most recent round of implementation with a few thousand students, again, small focused, but really high quality, we saw the percentage of students at division level, which is the highest level, go from just 7% at baseline to 53% in just 30 days. And it was really extraordinary. And what that's done is pretty much everyone in the community has heard about this, is demanding it from the regional directors. The regional directors are demanding the program from headquarters, and headquarters is ready to deliver this. So next year, in addition to the 50 schools where we're delivering this directly, the ministry has actually also mobilized government agents to deliver this in another 50 schools, bringing it to a total of 100. And then the plan is to stage up to all 750 schools over the coming years through this MOU. Botswana is quite small, so that's actually all the schools in the country. So we're hoping to reach national scale, every child in the country, just in the coming years. So that's just a little bit of an overview of sort of how this journey began and what happened. A few things that we've learned in terms of the adaptation process. One is on the kind of details of the context. So this might sound small, but actually has made a really big difference. One piece that we remember Pratham sharing with us is really important is actually the facilitator being on the floor with the child. I think the next photo actually has a nice image of this. I'm not sure if we're able to page through. Yeah, so this is the facilitator on the floor. The child's actually above the facilitator, really getting at the child's level. It's sort of not exactly what you instantly think of when you think about leveling the ability of the child, but there's something really important about actually coming to the kid's level in every way, in every dimension. And this is sort of saying it's open, it's safe, you take charge of your learning as the child as well. It's not just going to be kind of top down from the facilitator. But one thing that was interesting as this happened is the kids have uniforms. And so they were getting a little bit worried about their uniforms getting dirty, and the parents were getting worried about it. So we actually had to mobilize a campaign to work with parents to bring a change of clothes. And this actually ended up being a really, really important thing, even though quite a small detail. So I wanted to share that. I think another small detail that we found that was really important just to be able to make this work in the context was things like icebreakers. Part of the whole point is to get to the level of the child and work with them on the topics that they don't know and are sort of on this cusp of where they can get to, which is an uncomfortable space to be. As Usha said, if you just put your hand on the child's back, that makes a huge difference. We also incorporated things like icebreakers, just like singing, dancing, laughing at the beginning. It just totally eases the tension. Everyone's really comfortable, and then every child can learn. So we found that those details are really important, and those are a few of the things that we've integrated in. So I would sort of bucket that as sort of details of the intervention to really bring it to life. A second category of things that we've learned are really fundamental pieces of teaching at the right level in a given context. So two examples of this. One is corporal punishment. As we started to deliver teaching at the right level, we really bumped up against cultural punishment norms, because when the kids thought that corporal punishment was going to happen, they were quite scared of getting the wrong answer, and then they wouldn't really reveal when they didn't understand the material, and you can't teach at the right level if you don't know the right level. So this was a really important thing that we had to address. So we eliminated corporal punishment. None of our facilitators used that, and that was really first order for being able to teach at the right level. That also brought a few challenges with it in terms of actually how to manage the classroom, but we'll come to that in a second. But that was really, really, really important, and kind of addressing that really intentionally with our ministry counterparts in the classroom. Another example of kind of this teaching at the right level in context was you can group the students by various dimensions of their ability. So one might be how they can recognize numbers. Can they recognize 1 digit, 2 digits, 3 digits, 4 digits? Or by how they recognize operations, or can do operations, addition, subtraction, division. In our context, what we found in our needs assessment was actually most students could do most of the digits. And so that wasn't really where there was a lot of heterogeneity, but there was enormous heterogeneity on the operations. So a lot of students falling behind, a lot of differences on the operation. So that's how we ended up doing grouping. And I think because we were able to work with Pratham and JPAL to really think about the conditions and how do they manifest in our context, we were able to group by operations, and that proved really, really successful. And so how to teach at the right level with these pieces we found is really important. The last category of things we would emphasize in terms of the adaptation process is we're delivering this by young people, and there's a few things that we had to put into place to make that successful, because a lot of the young people that we're training are not trained teachers, and so there's a little bit of levels of support that we needed to provide. So for example, the nice thing actually is it's easier to unlearn because they haven't learned all the theories and what have you. So, when we said no corporal punishment, it's kind of an easy thing actually. So there's that advantage. But then also they didn't know how to manage the classroom. So we actually developed a suite of techniques to support them to manage the classroom, small things that make a big difference. So for example, there's different formations for small groups and big groups that they use. So when you want kids in an individual, we say peel banana. When we want students in kind of a half semicircle, you say fruit salad. And all of these things actually really help the facilitator manage the classroom. And there's a series of strategies that we've developed for that. Another is the level of structure. So one thing that we found that was important for young facilitators was having kind of tools to help them adapt. So one thing that we introduced is sort of a problem of the day, or what we call a checkpoint. So every single day, the facilitators have an objective that they design. They have a lesson plan and they design it. So let's say it's subtraction without borrowing 2 digits. They then have a problem that they design that same day to let them know if their kids actually got that concept. And then every child will do that problem before they leave for the day. And then what they can do at the end of the day is see how many % of kids got it. And if everyone got it, they move on to the next objective. If no one got it, they kind of repeat or they go backwards. So this has been a really nice structure and tool that our facilitators can use to actually be hyper adaptive every single day. And so there's no exact sort of prescription of what you do, but this is a tool and a structure that they can use to see if they're on track and how to adapt. So that's been really, really, really important. And then the final piece in terms of supporting youth-led implementation, and sort of as we kind of was thinking about this level of structure and support, has been built-in preparation and reflection. So every day before implementation, the implementers are supposed to prepare, reflect, and kind of really look at the plan for the day. And the same thing after they give each other feedback, they get guidance from the mentor. And then this provides an opportunity to also kind of daily adapt, reflect, and improve for the next day, as well as that coaching and mentoring support. So these are sort of 3 buckets of things that we've learned and adapted as we've gone through the process. Hope it is, you know, we know it's sort of different in every context, but hope those specifics can shed light on maybe some elements of how the generalizability puzzle framework can be implemented in action. So we'll stop there. I know we have some questions and answers, and we can take it from there.
Great. Thanks, Noam. Thanks, Mustafi. So yeah, we just have 5 minutes left for questions. So I'll pick a few from the ones that were submitted. The first one is for Emily. Would it be possible to launch TaRL nationally with the right preparation but without a pilot phase?
That's framed as a very yes or no answer. I'm afraid I don't have a yes or no answer. Would it be possible to launch it? Yes, I think it might be possible to launch it. Would it be very effective, and it would allow you to be sure that implementation is working well? I think that that's probably a no, but there's probably a whole lot of gray area in between. I think that one of my reflections from working in Zambia in a space where the ministry has always been keen to scale this to the whole country from the beginning, and really I think was disappointed that a number of the cooperating partners, including us, pushed back and said, no, but let's really test this and roll this out well, is that I think it would have been stronger if we had done it even slower. I think that by moving a bit slowly, you can really learn the approach and be able to scale it effectively. I also think the other important part of this is that we're all still learning about TaRL in Africa, and there's a lot of learning left to be done, and I'm really excited to see all that we learn over the next couple of years. And by going a little bit more slowly, you can also continue to learn as this grows. At the same time, I'm also aware that at every moment where TaRL isn't at full scale in a country, there's children who are not getting it and are sitting in schools unable to understand these basic skills. And so I see the push to move quickly and understand that that's an important approach. The other one quick thing to mention is that I think the leaders of practice that Pratham talks a lot about building as we scale up TaRL, or as others scale up TaRL across the continent, is really important. And if you can go a little more slowly, especially at the beginning, it can allow the system time to build these leaders of practice who have practiced the approach themselves, deeply understand the approach, and can decide about how to adjust it to their local setting, and that can allow the approach to be much more contextualized and much more effective for that local setting.
Thanks, Emily. I think we have time for just one more. So this one's for Tsepi, Usha, and Noam. What have been the most important adaptations across contexts? Why were these adaptations necessary, and what prompted them? So maybe if you could just choose a few.
Yeah, I guess one thing, you know, Tsepi and I were just chatting a bit before this, also kind of thinking about which of all the adaptations have proved most critical. I guess what we would highlight is this guidance that we got from the government, actually, which was to create this, instead of making decisions around the model kind of at a desk at headquarters, is starting to just implement the program. And we also got a really big push from Pratham on this, and just do it. Just do it, get people excited about it in some form, and then build that grassroots demand and see what people ask for and how they want it to happen. And so it's almost, instead of this sort of top-down ministry desk-based decision, this grassroots level sort of decentralized exploratory process on the ideal model. And so, for example, one thing that's happening now is next year with the government piece, we actually have 2 government implementers that are going to be implementing this, 2 young government implementers. So in 2 regions that we're working in, it's going to be the National Service Program participants. And then in one region, it's going to be qualified teachers who were previously unemployed, who are getting put on an internship scheme funded by the government. And so the reason that's come about is because there was slightly different demand in each region, slightly different political willingness, slightly different possibilities. And so this ability to sort of implement something directly at high quality, generate energy, show what it's actually like in that process, and then see what sticks almost in each region as an exploratory adaptation process. Eventually, throughout this process in the coming years, we'll see which model is really working best and aim to take that across the country, but that we've seen prove really well to the point where we've even gotten large commitments from the ministry to actually fund this at scale. So we would highlight that as sort of a key lesson for us so far.
Great. Thanks, Noam. So we're at time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. And thanks to the presenters for presenting. And we hope you'll join us for the next webinar. And that one will be on maintaining quality at scale. And we'll circulate more information on that in the new year. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Tim and Rob, for organizing.
Thank you.